Hi, welcome to the National Critics' Choice Online News, and welcome to the Stienberg Review. And today we have a special guest with us, none other than Dr. Shirley Geok-lin Lim. She's actually the full professor, serving here in Singapore as well as back in the United States. She's an accomplished poet as well as author, writer, and she's going to share with us her life experience and also updates on literature and how it has come a very long way. Dr. Shirley, welcome to my show.
Thank you.
And we were so amazed by your length and your biography, of experience, and the wealth that you have to offer to everyone here in Asia and also back in the United States. First of all, we'd like to know more about your first book that you published, and your experience, as well as your life experience being a poet and writer. I mean, I heard that you first published your first poem at the age of 10.
That's correct. Yeah. I was a little girl growing up in the small town Malacca, which is now quite a tourist destination in Malaysia. And I was educated by Irish nuns. And the missionary schools were the best in Asia then for English language education. And as a child, I loved to read, especially reading poetry. And that poem of mine was published in a newspaper, gave me more confidence as a 10-year-old little child. And I guess from there on, I haven't really quit writing poetry.
Oh, and what was your first poetry like?
Oh, it was very Hallmark like. It rhymed, it was very much in form, so it rhymed A, B, and it had stanzas. I'm still very much a formal poet, but I'm not so mechanical. When you're young, you imitate a lot. That's how you learn, you copy. And that was part of my learning how to write poems, to read poems I loved and then to try to imitate them.
Now, it is said that you are a Nyonya yourself, or Peranakan, is that correct?
I'm a Nyonya. That's correct. My mother was a Nyonya. Her family in Malaysia went back 7 generations.
Wow.
Yeah.
Amazing.
Yeah, strictly Chinese Malaysia. It's not Chinese.
Now, tell us more about the culture of writing and poetry. I mean, were your family receptive to the idea of you being a poet when you first published your first poet?
My father essentially raised us, and for him, because we were such a huge family, he had 2 wives and 10 children, he never took the trouble to find out what we were doing particularly in school, as long as we brought home the A's. So the only time he really paid attention was when it was report card day, and you brought home the report card, and he would look at the report card to see how many distinctions you got. But he never checked to see if you were doing your homework or what your essays looked like. So I don't think he particularly was aware that I was writing poetry, or short stories for that matter.
Oh, but in the culture of the Peranakan, do they actually encourage creative thinking, creative
The Peranakans, then, and I suspect even now, were a very oral community. They love to talk, chat. So storytelling, what Sing Hong Kingston in the United States calls talk story, is a huge practice in Peranakan families. The women sitting around and munching their cereal leaves would tell stories, would gossip. And that's how they entertained themselves through the days. These were the days, of course, before television, before DVDs. So as a child, I grew up listening to a lot of these stories. And so storytelling, I guess, is part of the communal tradition that I grew up in.
Wow. Now, speaking about tradition, as a poet and writer, have you come across a time where identity was questioned? Do you think, because really, many poets and writers found themselves in a so-called carrefour or crossroads, they call it, where they ask themselves, who am I? What am I? Can I express in my writing?
No, I never had a problem with who am I or what am I. In that way, perhaps I've been lucky. I've always known who I am and what I am. My problem has usually been in having people accept me for who I am. So I was always seen as a naughty girl. And frankly, I didn't want to be a girl as girls were defined then. You know, girls were passive, they were obedient, they were supposed to get married, keep their mouths shut. I mean, who would want to be a girl under those conditions? So I knew I wasn't a girl like that, but it was very hard to be accepted for who I was and am. So in some ways, I'm really pleased to be the age I am, because I don't have as many of those social struggles of having to be accepted for the kinds of things I want to do.
Yes, but about the question of being a Peranakan Chinese, or because there's a lot of talk or even discussion today about the identity of a Chinese. So, how do you define a Peranakan? Is a Peranakan a partially born Chinese mixed blood of Malay culture, or is it just a standalone culture today?
Well, you know, I really reject all these essentializing notions of Chineseness. It's not as if I were to have my blood drawn, that anyone looking at my blood would say, oh, this is the blood of a Chinese. I mean, there's no way to distinguish the blood of a Chinese from the blood of a Malay or an Indian, which is why we can have blood transfusions without any problems, right? Identities come with place and history and family. And for us Peranakans who have lived in Malaysia for so long at that time, I think we were really Malaysians, but we had Chinese customs. And many Peranakans never spoke any Chinese. In fact, I was just recently, yesterday, reading a book on Peranakan poems and songs from Penang. And the Peranakans in Penang spoke Hokkien, a particular kind of Penang Hokkien. But the Peranakans in Malacca spoke Baba Malay. So even among the Peranakans, there are distinctions from the straight settlement towns that they were in terms of language choice. So humans are unique in that we are all one common species, so we can intermarry without any problems, no matter what races say. But at the same time, we distinguish ourselves in smaller and smaller ethno groups. So even within a limited area of territory, you would have humans that begin to speak very different dialects, or choose to have different costumes, or cook their curries in different ways. It's remarkable, that there is this universality of the species, as well as the endless diversity and variety that the species insists on generating for itself.
Now, I must congratulate you that the National Critics' Choice actually has bestowed an award for lifetime achievement in your work as a poet and literature in Southeast Asia.
I am so grateful. I'm so grateful for this beautiful award.
Yes,
yes,
and also,
thank you so much.
Could you tell us more about your new book?
Walking Backwards.
Yes.
Yes.
So it's a book of poems.
Yeah, it's a book of poems. And the cover is a photograph of a young woman in Taipei who is walking down an alleyway in Taipei. And a friend of mine in Hong Kong took it on a vacation. And I asked him if he had any photographs or cover, and I love this. So I think.
Why did you choose this cover?
Well, first of all, the title of the book is Walking Backwards, and this woman is walking and you see her back. And the poem really talks about my arriving in Hong Kong. It was in 1999. I went to Hong Kong as the chair professor of the University of Hong Kong. And in that moment, I thought I was walking backwards into China, talking about Chinese identity. I never seen myself really as Chinese. I was Chinese Malaysian, with the emphasis on Malaysian. And I did not go to Chinese school. I can't read the Chinese language. I only speak Hokkien. I don't speak Mandarin or Cantonese. Chinese, or Hakka, or Teochew. So when I went to Hong Kong, I felt this wonderful, strange shift of identity that suddenly I began to feel like, oh, I am Chinese after all, because I was suddenly encompassed, encapsulated in the middle of millions and millions of these people who look like me and whom I look like. So that was a little, I guess, paradigm shift in the way I thought of myself. And so the walking backwards is the sense that I was walking backwards in time to the time of my forefathers.
Oh wow! Now, is there one poem that you actually love the most, that you like to give a talk on?
Well, I don't really usually love my poems, either
all
more
of them.
or whatever. They're very different, which is why my books are so skinny. My poems tend to be all different from each other, and so I can't write along that way. But if we're talking about walking backwards, maybe I can read you a Hong Kong poem.
Oh, okay. Something that has impact you, personally.
Maybe I will read something that has to do with Chineseness, since you asked me about Chineseness. Let me see if I can find it. Maybe The Source.
Okay.
SOURCE 36, because I was just talking about how we Peranakans very seldom think of ourselves as really Chinese, but as Malaysians. And yet here's a poem that contradicts exactly what I just told you.
Okay.
And I'll read it for you if I may. The source. China is the source I have not studied, although she, he has been a constant, like mother, father in memory. China was the milk that was too heavy, that made one gag, vomit, like the scent of stinky tofu. Temple bonzes muttered notebooks of instruction. Women taught other women what was right and wrong, and they were almost always wrong. Center of the world, great lump of decay, where no one is happy, was China in Malacca, a misfit, dumb country. And I, its misfit child, bastard and deaf, handicapped and wild. So you see, it's not a poem of celebration of China as the motherland or the source of identity, but a poem about the problem of China as I was growing up. That it was this, wild, desolate origin that as a child I never wanted to identify with.
Wow.
Yeah.
Amazing. And this book is now available right now?
Yeah, you can get it from Amazon.com,
Yes.
US for sure. It's a press that is based in New Mexico, and the book is distributed by the University of New Mexico Press.
Oh, very nice. So please do get hold of her new book of poems by Dr. Shirley Geok-lin, Walking Backwards. And it's available right now on Amazon and all leading good bookstores around the world.
Thank you so much.
Dr. Shirley, also, another thing about identity and moving forward about literature, a lot of people are now questioning about the emergence and new territories where literature has progressed and evolved. Now, could you give us some insights on what do you see today and moving forward?
Well, of course, it depends on what you mean by literature. If you're talking about elite texts, as in the old days, special kinds of novels that are challenging to read, or long modernist poems, the audience for these kinds of texts may be diminishing. But the appetite for stories, the appetite for plots that keep going on, today, for example, I was just yesterday talking to a Korean international student in Singapore and telling her about my brother in Malacca and how these Malaysian TV watchers are crazy over the historical series coming out of Korean television. It's a huge success. Korean television historical narratives. And it's all about plot, it's about character. It's all about intrigue. And this is literature. It's the life of the mind, life of the imagination. It's a kind of a fantasy that we humans enjoy being immersed in, the lives of other people and other histories and eras. Also, I find that with everyone, including young and old, there is a kind of an innate enjoyment for language play. We enjoy jokes. Jokes very often come out of incongruity or puns or surprise. And you can't tell a joke in some ways without being involved with a kind of literary imagination. You know, even visual jokes are based on some kind of literary representation, right? So I don't think literature is dying or is in danger. It is taking different manifestations that maybe an 18th or 19th century literary person may not recognize. You go to YouTube, and there are all kinds of poems that are being put into visual form on YouTube. You watch advertising on television, and the language that comes out from the advertising world is playful and, you know, evocative and hits on the audience's emotions. So, as far as I'm concerned, that is literary, using the special aesthetic powers of language in all their dimensions: story, play, character, surprise. So no, maybe it's because I'm a teacher of literature. I'm completely, absolutely optimistic about literature in the 21st century.
Now, what is your philosophy in writing poets and literature? You know, what does it mean to you?
Good, very good question. Because I'm teaching younger Singaporeans, right, who are in their 20s. I just had a class with them today, and I have the short view with them, and then I have the long view with myself. I'm hoping that my young poets will continue to write, even when they are at my age, which is many, many decades ahead of them. When I was younger, people would ask me, so are you a poet? And I confess to you now, I always felt this pang of confusion and guilt. How can I claim to be a poet? Even though I may have had published already a book or two books. And I think the reason for that was I really firmly believe that you cannot call yourself a poet if you're not writing poetry still. Right? Just like a composer, you know, if Beethoven stopped composing, could he still call himself a composer? If a pianist stops performing on the piano, can she still call herself a pianist? Do you see what I'm saying? And I feel that way about poets. If and when poets stop writing their poems, I think they need to stop calling themselves poets. You know, the word poesis comes from the Greek, that is the creator, to create, to make. Once you stop making, then you're no longer a poet. Right? That's my take. So my long view of it is, yes, I am a poet, and the way I prove that I'm a poet is that I try to write as much and as often as I can. I don't know as much is the right word. Quantity is not what it's about. Before I left California to come on my visiting professorship here, the Nyan Policy visiting professorship, I was writing really practically a poem a day. I go for a walk in the morning and I write a poem then. Most of them are probably dreadful poems, but I was writing a poem a day and going in and inputting it. When I arrived in Singapore, I tried to maintain that rhythm, and then it diminished to 3 poems a week. And now, frankly, I haven't written a poem in about 3 weeks.
Oh, wow.
So there's something about Singapore, maybe it's the pace of the intensity of my work with these young students, and now that word is out that I'm here, I have a lot of invitations to give talks here and go there, and unfortunately I've accepted a lot of them. And that eats into the quiet time, the alone time. Some poets I think can be in a pub and dash up a wonderful poem. Apparently, Dylan Thomas was like that. I'm not sure if it's true, but that's the word that he could go to a pub and get drunk and then dash out a wonderful poem, right? But I'm not like that. I need aloneness to write a poem.
Does that include your philosophy for literature?
Yes, absolutely. You know, there's a German word for it, and I'm not sure I'm going to get it right. It's Fleischsitz.
Oh.
That is, you know, the flesh at the bottom when you sit.
Yes.
And a writer needs Fleischsitz. A writer needs to be able to sit down and write, whether on the computer or in longhand, or stand up but nonetheless be alone to write. Writing is a profession that asks for a lot of time alone. You can't write while you're on the telephone chatting, and you can't write when you're sitting at dinner and socializing. The mind meets together the many stray fibers of thought and feelings, and then sort of work them out in some kind of alchemical way for the words to come out in a series, becoming sentences, becoming paragraphs, turning to pages. So there's that aloneness is necessary. You know, a carpet maker at the loom can loom while chatting with another person, right? Someone embroidering can yakety yak while embroidering. I don't know about a painter. You know, did Michelangelo, was he able to talk while he was doing the Sistine, ceilings? I'm not sure. But I know for writers, you really need to sit and be alone.
Wow. Now, speaking of writing, you have written quite a few novels yourself.
Yes, correct.
And I must say that one of them is called Sister Swing.
Yeah, that's my last adult novel.
Yes, and it's still available around the world. You can still get it on Amazon, by the way. And
it has a different cover now because it was reissued by
yes,
Marshall Cavendish.
yes, that's right.
Yeah, but it's the same novel.
And so, tell us more about this title.
Sister Swing. Yeah, it's in many ways it's a very traditional plot. Three sisters. It's like a fairy tale, right?
Uh-huh.
You know, when you read fairy tales, it's always three brothers, three sisters. So here are three sisters. And because I'm such a Malacca person, it of course begins in Malacca.
Okay.
And the three sisters are very unlike each other. I don't think I was being pedagogically mechanical in that way. I really had a notion of sisters who are very much unlike each other. So the eldest is not so good in studies, the second one is the bright one, the youngest one is the religious one. And I guess in some ways I was exploring character and exploring ideas. And for me, intelligence in a woman is usually a predictor of unhappiness. So the second one, the bright one, is the one who's usually messed up. The one who's not so bright, she turns out okay in terms of finding happiness. And I guess some feminists don't like my take on that. But intelligence is not about becoming happy. Intelligence is about doing other things in the world. Making yourself happy, that's what quote-unquote normal people want. But people who are highly intelligent tend not to be quote-unquote normal. They have other needs than those of shelter, food, and love. And so those other needs make life more challenging for the very intelligent subject. So I was exploring those kinds of differences in character. And then of course I took these young women out of Malacca and put them in California.
Ah.
So the contrast between the two cultures, right? was something I really enjoyed exploring.
Now, if you had a choice again, if you live another life, or if Marshall Cavendish were to come to you again and say to you, would there be a sequel, or would you rewrite again, or is there any part of the story that you would have done better?
Well, the interesting thing about your question is that the novel is in many ways a sequel